just hang in there, Phil. Just hang in there. We'll get to the good times, and the good times will be great. And then the next year we won one game. It wasn't until round 17 or so. That was by far the hardest year of my career.
Deep inside each footy club is the story of how it came to be. Team Builders goes behind the scenes with those who made it all happen to give insight into the creation of some of Australia's biggest football franchises. With Tasmania in the early stages of building a standalone club, after finally being granted a licence to enter the AFL in 2028, the first new club to enter the national competition in 16 years, Team Builders will look back on all the startup teams that joined the then VFL as it expanded beyond the confines of Victoria. From South Melbourne's move to Sydney in 1982, to the Eagles and Bears in 1987, through to Gold Coast and GWS in 2011 and 2012 respectively, we'll talk to inaugural CEOs, presidents, coaches, and star players to get an inside look into how these AFL teams were built from scratch. This is AFL Team Builders.
Welcome to AFL Team Builders. In this episode, we explore the club tasked with one of the most difficult builds of them all, Greater Western Sydney. The Giants, or Team GWS as they were first called in the lead up to their formation, were put on the AFL map on March 13, 2008, after the AFL won the support of the 16 club presidents to establish an 18th side to be based in Western Sydney. They would enter the league in 2012, 1 year after another bold expansion on the Gold Coast. It was a daunting assignment, with Aussie rules football about as well known in Western Sydney as Sepak Takraw. But as then AFL boss Andrew Demetrio said at the time, it was a generational decision, and the success of AFL in Greater Western Sydney wouldn't be known for 25 or 30 years. To try to fast-track its success on and off the field, the league delivered its new entity the biggest and broadest range of concessions ever granted. They couldn't not really. And the club's shrewd backroom operators, including the likes of coach Kevin Sheedy, football manager Graham Gubby Allen, list boss Stephen Silvagni, inaugural CEO Dale Holmes and his successor Dave Matthews, certainly capitalised on the hand they were dealt. However, while the club's draft concessions were to some outrageous, they needed to be, because the Giants were in one of the toughest battles any expansion club had found themselves in.
The way I was thinking about the way the club needed to de-risk, because we knew it was going to be a real challenge building into Western Sydney. The key things to de-risk was to get the right stadium, and we got the stadium funding for the build out of what was the Olympic Baseball Stadium, which became the showgrounds for the Royal Easter Show, and it needed about a $70 million redevelopment, and we'd worked through 3 premiers over 4 years, literally started back in 2007, and we finally got the funding of that. That was a priority, as was the ACT government $30 million partnership, which was secured, which allowed us to play 3 games a year in Canberra, and they were incredibly supportive. The Canberra community was right behind the club from day one. Those 2 things were important to de-risk the club. And then really corporate sponsorship was critical. So securing major sponsors, all the program sponsors, just to give us the revenue streams we needed to deliver enough self-generated revenue. I think it's impossible to really understand it unless you live it. It's incredibly hard. I grew up in country Victoria. Footy was your life. And, growing up in Melbourne, as a sort of teenager through my 20s, and lived and breathed it. Then you come to Sydney for work, and, the Swans in 93, having been in Sydney for 11 years, so effectively where the Giants are today. I think their average attendance was 7,000, membership was 3,000. It's a tough market, tough sporting market, not just in the sporting market. There's other options from an entertainment point of view, beaches and the like, and great winters. People have got other alternatives than just going to the footy. In Western Sydney, the game doesn't have a fabric. It hasn't grown up with the game. It's NRL soccer heartland, 2.5 million people. And so, it's virgin territory for the game in that area. But, we have to start somewhere, and it was never going to be easy. But we had to get the ball rolling to be a truly national competition. To only have a game in Sydney every second week, which is the major capital city of Australia, is insane. So to build content each week, to have media coverage, to build awareness, to build a a genuine rivalry between the Giants and the Swans was all going to fertilise the game. And I think, we've got to, when people talk about generational play, it's literally a 30-year exercise to be able to get to the stage where we can get, Giants Stadium full week on week. It's going to take that long, and there's no shortcuts. It's just going to be a really, a long challenge to build that base and build awareness, and obviously a lot of investment, and it requires it requires a lot of resilience. But when we look back after 30 years of the Giants in Sydney, I'd hope to think that we can look back and say that investment was worth making.
Through both necessity and design, the club was never going to follow the templates set by the clubs that came before them. They wanted to do things differently to make a splash. On November 16, 2010, Team GWS was officially launched as the Greater Western Sydney Giants, splashed in orange and charcoal with the motto, "Think big, live big, play big." Next came the song, another element that showcased the left field thinking of the club's decision makers. Dave Matthews was the AFL's General Manager of National and International Development, working on a lot of the behind-the-scenes projects for the Giants during their pitch for the 18th licence. He then jumped the fence from governing body to clubland, taking over from Holmes as the Giants CEO late in 2011. He recalls on Will Schofield's Backchat podcast a sing-along session that helped inspire the club to settle on its famous Big Big Sound song, written by Harry James Angus from the Melbourne band The Cat Empire.
I think my first day was Melbourne Cup Day 211, and the first draft, which Toby Green and Keneally and others were taken in, was only a couple of weeks away, and we didn't have a mascot, we didn't have a song, and working with Kevin Sheedy was brilliant at that time, because he's like, you got to make these decisions, you got to get these decisions right, and as a famous Australian band, The Cat Empire, and a trumpet player in that is a guy called Harry Angus. Harry Angus took it upon himself to write our theme song, and he emailed it in to the AFL, and it sat in someone's inbox for I don't know how long, and then he emailed it again, and finally, through a mate of a mate, got it to a guy called Joseph Laposta, who was working at AFL New South Wales, and I remember him coming to me going, "Look, I know you've got to choose a song. Harry Angus has submitted this song. What do you think of it? You need to have at least respond to him." And that, I think that's become one of the great songs in the competition.
So this is the... He
wrote that, yeah.
Wow. That's cool.
He wrote that, and he came to the club one day, very weirdly, his mum and dad, turns out, worked at Deakin University.
Geelong University.
Yeah, and they'd asked my mum and dad to babysit him one night. And I think I was there, and we had this weird connection that we chatted about. But he came along and bought his trumpet, and he'd written the lyrics, and he sat around in a circle with the likes of Kevin Sheedy, Mark Williams, Luke Power. There was a number of the players all sat in a circle. He said, "Look, the number one thing we're going to work on is guys need to be able to sing this. I can sing it, I can play it, I can record this, but if you can't sing it, then this is a failed course of action, basically." So he ran this workshop just singing this song, and I think it's Luke Power's credited with putting the words "never surrender" into it, because it was basically that part of the song was just an instrumental, and he and Mark Williams and others were talking about the yellow and black in the Richmond song, that you got to have something that you can really belt out or the crowd can get into. So yeah, those sort of decisions, those opportunities, writing a song like that, or receiving a song like that, you go, gee, there's some. What are the great decisions we've made? What are the decisions, if we had our time again, you might change? But it's been good fun.
Off the field, the club was starting to feel real, but a sports club isn't a club without players, and the Giants needed to find some. Armed with an expanded playing list and salary cap to give the club an edge in drafting and recruiting, the Giants at least had the potential to load up with more young talent than any club had ever done. However, unlike the Gold Coast Suns a year earlier, they weren't desperate to sign a superstar player like Gary Ablett Jr. or recruit a host of seasoned mid-career players. Instead, the club-wide strategy was to pick the teeth out of the top end of the draft, sign a handful of youngish players from rival clubs, and complement them with carefully selected late-career, bigger-bodied veterans like Dean Brogan and Chad Corns, premiership players from Port Adelaide, Brisbane triple premiership star Luke Power, and Melbourne fan favourite James McDonald. As Holmes recalls, the club was more than prepared to play the long game when it came to on-field success.
So we decided to go with a strategy which was to really hurt early for the first 3 years and really play kids, and then look to surround that with some older players who were 30 years and older who had 1-year contracts. And so we had a bookend strategy of young kids and then some older bodies. But we didn't really take anyone in their 20s other than, say, Phil Davis, Cal Ward, who we brought to the club as effectively 20-year-olds. So our strategy was to really hurt for the first 3 years. In effect, we didn't expect to win a game. And that was hard for some people to get their head around. But that was the opportunity for us to build a video of 10 years of success from basically 215 to 225. That was the video we looked at. It was a very difficult sell. We had this phrase, which was, Sydney loves success. It's not good enough to be competitive. You have to win. You have to succeed. And success for us was being top 4 over 10 years, which gave you enough chances to get to the big dance and then ultimately win a few. And so we were prepared to trade off on being competitive early days in the pursuit of success, ultimate success. That meant it was going to be a hard few years. That's why Sheeds was really important, because he was a guy who, and Mark Williams was very important early days because they were hard heads. They'd been around footy clubs. They knew how to sell hope, keep the spirit up. But in terms of the first few years of the club competing, it would be incredibly tough for Dave and the organisation to continue to, hold the strategy, which they did. They kept the strategy. Probably, 215 was when they started to roll in some more mature age, like Mumford, Shaw, and those guys that complemented the kids. So that was part of the strategy, to bring in at that stage some other experienced players to complement the kids. But we were fortunate we had some older bodies who were great leaders, Luke Power, Anthony McDonald, Dean Brogan, Kane Corns, and these sort of players who came for a year, played for a year, and then they moved then into coaching roles within the club. So they almost effectively played an on-field coaching role year one, and then became part of the coaching fabric thereafter. But it was a hard sell to get, people from traditional AFL states to buy that strategy. But I thought, I do think it was the right strategy for the club. Unfortunately, we haven't won a flag, but we've won in 6 final series, and we're back, amongst it now.
Stephen Silvagni, the Giants' original list manager, says the club was a difficult sell to potential trade targets.
I think we wanted to try and bring in good players, and it was difficult. At the best of times, it really doesn't matter. I shouldn't say it really doesn't matter, but it's even in Melbourne today. It's hard to move players from clubs, and we at that time we were selling a story that our original base was going to be in Blacktown. And we had nothing really built. The boys were training on a baseball pitch, and and then this is what we're going to be doing here. This is going to be our venue. So it was a hard sell, and we obviously had money available to us, and even by attacking some of these younger players, these uncontracted players. Yes, we had a really good salary cap at the time, but we were able to front end a lot of the money that would enable us to actually hold on to our young talent going forward. But it was about, selling a story, telling them what we thought we could actually do along the way. We felt we had really good concessions, and it was about trying to build a list that was really capable of competing in 4 to 5 years' time. At that time, there were some 17-year-olds already up there. Jeremy Cameron was one of them, Dylan Shield was one of them, Treloar was another. So they knew what that talent was, and then we knew, this is what we're going to be looking at in the first the first draft and second draft. And so from a footy perspective, I think we could sell that pretty well because we had good people. It's just to move them from a club, and they've got mates there, and And to be perfectly honest, when you were looking at the two establishment new clubs, you had Gold Coast and you had GWS Blacktown. The sell was really the blue water and golden sand, and like if I was a 20-year-old, I know where I'd probably want to go and live. So it was difficult, but having said that, there was an element of the people that were there as well. We had, we obviously had Sheeds and we had Mark Williams. So to have those two people that were very successful in their own right, and then obviously Gubby as well. So I think they got that right, that they had some experience. And when you've got Mark Williams there and you've got Kevin Sheed and Gubby, and they've been part of Flags, and that's what kids want to do. Yes, they want to play footy, but they want to be part of successful teams. I think that really helped.
One recruit who did buy what the Giants were selling was their first signing, Phil Davis. He was an emerging third-year player at Adelaide who, despite his tender years, oozed leadership potential alongside his highly promising abilities as a key defender. Raised in Adelaide and rated highly by the Crows, Davis didn't initially take the approach from GWS seriously. Instead, he was simply flattered by the interest from the startup club. However, the more he listened, the more he could imagine himself joining this unknown team in an area where the game itself was hardly known. He would become the fledgling team's first experienced player signing, and was quickly followed by the Western Bulldogs' Callan Ward and Sam Reid, Melbourne's former number 1 draft pick Tom Scully, and tough Fremantle on-baller Reece Palmer. It was hardly star power, but a nucleus of talented young players with a few years playing experience, and most importantly, people of good character. This was a core the new club was going to build around. Davis found the challenge of helping build the Giants from scratch alluring, but the contrast between the resource-rich Crows and the young Giants soon hit him between the eyes.
Feels like a long time ago, so I remember, because I was at the Crows, started 2009 season, and he started hearing about the expansion clubs, and I must admit, I didn't really spend too much time thinking of it, because for me at that point, I didn't really think I could play that well, so I was like, hopefully I just can get a game at some point. And then start of 2011, there was a few stories going around about who the Giants were looking at, because they were already going the Suns. I remember my first approach was maybe early April through my manager, saying that they were interested, and my first response was, no, I'm all good, thank you. Can you please just go and get a deal done with the Crows? And of all things happening, hurt my shoulder. A few weeks later, a lot of downtime, and the Giants just kept badgering my manager to be like, can you please talk to Phil? Can you please talk to Phil? And I was like, well, how are we going with the Crows? I don't really want to do it. But I had so much time that I eventually decided to take the meeting. And that meeting was the turning point in the whole process. I'd got a bit of information through a pamphlet after the first introduction by my manager to it, and really just had relatively dismissed it, obviously flattered for the idea. But, went through the whole thing. The whole meeting went for a few hours. Gubby and Sauce, both very charismatic people. Sorry, Graham Allen and Stephen Silvagni, both very charismatic people. Sold me the dream. And to me, at that point when I left, I sort of thought to myself, the decision's really, what can the Crows do in the next 2-3 years versus what the Giants will be capable of from 3 years to 10 years, was sort of one of the major decision-making elements for me. That was a big part of it. Obviously, financially was a factor too. And then the other one was obviously, what would it mean to start and grow a club. There's no doubt that when I made my decision to come, I probably underestimated how difficult it was. So I came out, I think it was the 3rd of August, because I was injured. I was out for the season. The Crows were really asking for what I was going to do. And I think within the first 2 weeks, Dale Holmes, the CEO, walked away. So that was pretty stressful for me. Obviously, more, you're looking for stability. So that was the first shock, was a bit strange. And then obviously Dave Matthews went up there, which was an enormous outcome for the club. It was hard because the Crows had just finished building it or updating their facility, $20 million, the biggest team in South Australia, one of the most significant clubs in the AFL in terms of, size, power, profit, and all the likes, to go to the smallest club in Australia with the least amount of resources. I was 21 years old. The 35, 18-year-olds, as much as I was young, felt like I was much older than those guys. that was different. And then the facilities were in Portaloos, basically. Probably a bit better than Portaloos, that's a bit mean. But short-term erected facilities. We're training Monday, Friday on baseball diamonds, so the grass in between the pitches plate, the first, second, and third plate. We're just running around there. Don't get too close to the fence, all these crazy things. Then Wednesday we got access to a proper oval, except when it rained because the council shut the oval. So my first pre-season has gone from a $20 million upgraded facility to basically temporary facilities. Gone from training at Max Bashir Oval, which is a beautiful oval just outside Amy Stadium, to training on diamonds 2 times a week, and one oval that was occasionally open. When it wasn't, we had to go and train on a basketball court.
Another key recruit for the Giants was an athlete who had barely kicked a Sharon before, but one who suddenly became one of the sport's highest paid players, Israel Folau.
Over to you, Izzy.
Thanks, mate. It's been quite a bit of a build-up over the last few months, and now the time has arrived for me to play my first game on Saturday. So it's a pretty exciting time for myself and also the club. I just can't wait to get out there on Saturday and give it a real good crack.
Is that all you're going to say?
That's it, mate.
Folau controversially signed with the Giants midway through the 2010 NRL season, while he was still playing for NRL powerhouse the Brisbane Broncos. He lasted just one season in the AFL, playing just 13 games, but his impact off the field in the battle of the hearts and minds of Sydney's West was lauded by those within the Giants and at AFL HQ. Holmes and Davis both look back at the recruitment of Folau as a success, following on from the signing of another co-jumper, Carmichael Hunt, by Gold Coast a year previously.
It was an AFL-driven initiative because they'd done the Carmichael Hunt Gold Coast initiative, and the sort of thought process was that, particularly for Greater Western Sydney, where there was not a great awareness of the game, to be honest, that you needed some iconic personalities in advance of the club playing to really build profile and build awareness of the club. So build brand in advance of the product coming to market. And that's when Sheedy and Folau played in really important roles in terms of building that profile early days. And that was a really, an AFL-driven initiative, and certainly was involved in that process. Israel played the first year in the NEFL with us, had a very good year, first year in the NEFL. May have won a goal kicking that year, I can't recall, but effectively, changed his body shape. But I think ultimately his heart wasn't in it, and therefore, the project, I suppose people would say, from an on-field perspective, didn't deliver. It certainly delivered on an off-field perspective in terms of building profile around the club. But yeah, it was an interesting exercise.
It's about putting the effort, really trying to engage as much as possible. And that started at the start. Obviously we didn't have a Gary Ablett Jr. that we could just roll out and everyone knows. I'd like to think that everyone knows who Gary Ablett Jr. is, or Buddy Franklin. There's only a couple of those, Dustin Martins. There are only a couple of those. So we didn't really have a marquee player like that. We had Izzy Folau, which I think confused a bit of the community to be like, is he still a rugby player, or what's he doing? At least it created a lot of discussion. His ability to get us on the papers and on television screens was enormous. So I'm sure if you ever looked at his marketing effect and value, I'm sure his contract came way under the sort of value he provided.
Of course, the bulk of the Giants playing list would come via under-18 players who had grown up with a footy in their hands. Initially, the club was granted access to the 12 best 17-year-olds in the country, a list featuring the likes of Jeremy Cameron, Adam Treloar and Dylan Shiel. GWS were also given an eye-watering draft hand, the first selection in each round of the 2011 National Draft, as well as picks 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 9, 10, 11, 13 and 14 in the first round of the draft. It was a staggering haul, with other clubs fearing a super team was being assembled. Many in the industry expected the Giants would trade some of the picks for established rival players, but the club was determined to stockpile as much young talent as possible and brace for some early pain. Welcoming a huge influx of first-round talent, as well as their 17-year-old and zone concessions, also allowed the Giants to instill a long-term talent strategy, knowing any departures would be offset by more early picks coming in.
Yeah, I think the football industry can be sometimes a roller coaster ride of emotions, and the media certainly will jump all over that. So you needed to have hard heads that were resilient, that could deal with adversity, that would keep optimism and sell hope, and that was important for our football club, because we knew that we were going to bleed on the ground for 3 years, and we knew it was going to be incredibly challenging in terms of just the environment that we're going into. And I think one of the other things, we were very clear about the people that we wanted to bring to the football club on field. And Steve Silvagni had really identified Phil Davis and Callum Ward as the guys that he felt, were the right types of people to have around our footy club. And they became the joint captains as 20-year-olds. And they, we had those old heads I talked about earlier that were around those guys to help on field, almost as line coaches. And that's the way we built it. And we brought in a lot of young, talented 18-year-olds. And the idea was to then, use that group of, established coaches and older players to surround the younger guys. But then the older players, the 30-plus old who were on one-year contracts, would then wean off, and we'd bring through the next wave of talent that was coming through from the following year's draft. We always knew we'd lose a significant amount of players because the way the list build was, our list numbers were going to reduce progressively. And with that, we knew we would get replenished with, future draft picks as part of compensation for losing some players.
Boasting a collection of possibly the finest junior talent ever assembled at one club, the Giants needed to find a way to make them and their families feel at home in their new, unique surrounds, to jealous people as well as teammates. They prioritised player welfare, and former Brisbane and Richmond star Craig Lambert and his wife Melissa were particularly important in helping the new arrivals settle into the city. Finding suitable living quarters also proved critical. Graham Gubby Allen, the Giants' head of football, had a son at Florida State University and had flown to the States to visit him and learn a few tricks along the way. He was impressed by how the university looked after its football team, with the players living, training, eating and socialising together in their own private compound. He implored the Giants' power brokers to invest in a community living complex at Breakfast Point, almost like a college campus, as opposed to each player finding their own place to live or being billeted out to host families. Holmes says despite the exorbitant rental costs, it was one of the best decisions the club made during its formative years.
The issue around how we're going to build a club with 17, 18-year-olds in Western Sydney was a real challenge. And so Sheeds, Gub, myself and others had sort of put time into thinking a lot about that strategy. And I think Sheeds had moved into Brecky Point, and, it's somewhat quarantined on the river there. And it was the perfect environment for us to build a community, a campus-style community, if you like. So we had 40 players across about 20 apartments. We had about 10 staff inside and around that campus. So, they had breakfast, lunch and dinner together, and they lived and learned together. And it was effectively getting the boys into the system in an environment where we could somewhat quality control that environment. And then almost like they'd be on their old plates and then their P plates, and then get their full license and go and live somewhere else after the second year. Cost us $800,000 a year in rent. But, that's sort of hard for people from traditional football states to understand the sort of challenges around how you bring a whole heap of young kids into a new foreign environment. So that was in retrospect, I think, a really good exercise in terms of building the base, and built great unity, bound the boys together. A lot of those guys, lived together in that environment. And I think, we look back on it and think it was something that really contributed to the fabric of the football club. I think the Giants is a real football club. It feels like a country family footy club.
With administrators, coaches and players settled in, it was time for the team to test themselves against the hardened outfits of the AFL. Unsurprisingly, with a team made up of mostly first and second year players, supported by only a few battle-hardened veterans, the Giants were belted most weeks on the way to a 2-win season. The following year, the Poultry win number halved as they collected their second consecutive wooden spoon, hardly an auspicious beginning. But it was exactly what GWS had prepared for, and the club was comfortable to cop some heavy early whacks, with the expectations a successful 10-year window of success would come from about 2015.
The 10-year video is a metaphor. It's effectively a 215 to 225 timeline that we identified as the opportunity for us to be successful. And our framework for success was to be top 4 consistently over that period. It was really this recognition that if we kept bringing in elite talent to the club, and we created the right environment and culture within that football club that we could consistently be competitive or ultimately successful from 2016 onwards. And so we thought about that as like a 10-year timeline. And I think it was because we could elongate the timeline because of this replenishing of the talent that we could get from any compensation or draft or trading, that it gave us confidence that we could actually have a 10-year period that we'd be consistently, up in the top four. Now we haven't achieved that consistently enough, but we've been thereabouts.
While Holmes and the club's administrators were comfortable with the short-term pain, it was a different story for the players, who were bruised, battered and badly beaten most weeks in the first few seasons. Professional sport is a win-loss industry, and each week the players were given confronting feedback that they were miles off the pace. Davis admits he had his moments of doubt as he trudged off the field defeated almost on a weekly basis.
Yeah, lots of times. I must admit, Neil, the first year was sort of like this, oh wow, we won 2 games, how good's that? I knew we were going to lose, that's fine. It's not great fun, but it's fine, it's tolerable. A bit like that point I made before about just hang in there, Phil, just hang in there, we'll get to the good times, and the good times will be great. And then the next year we won 1 game, it wasn't until round 17 or so. That was by far the hardest year of my career. Where are we going? What are we doing? Why aren't we improving? We weren't even close most of the year. Crowds, we had, I think, 40,000 for our first ever game, and then the first ever game of 2013 was 28. So you start to think, all right, the shine's coming off. And then 2016 on field, we won 6 games, which was by far the most significant year, I think, in our development. To go from 2 to 6 wins showed us that we're actually going the right way. There were huge amounts of doubt at the end of 2013. And then 2014 to get to 6 wins was just extraordinary. It gave us great belief. And then I sort of feel like away we go. But then the enormity stayed with me for a long time because you would always hit hurdles or something would happen, whether it be travel, whether it be crowds, whether it be retention, whether it just be things that are ingrained in big clubs like I experienced at Adelaide. You were trying to ingrain them at the same time and win. And I still think, sitting here right now, the enormity of building this club still sits with me right now, 12 years in. We need another big 12 years to hopefully get closer and closer to what we all aspire and hope it can get to. But yeah, I think initially 2013 from an on-field performance was crazy. I was just like, wow, this is pretty scary. And then 2014 was significant there. But then the underlying aspect of we're trying to win, building a club culture and infrastructure and history that gives the future generation more chances that, at the time you don't really always think that there's an impediment to success, but there just naturally is in the new environment.
However, just like they predicted, the Giants did emerge from those dark days to become a respected, legitimate football club on and off the field. While a maiden premiership has eluded them, GWS has played off in 6 of the past 8 final series, including the 2019 Grand Final, a record nearly every AFL team would be envious of, and they have established a bona fide rivalry with their crosstown big brothers, the Sydney Swans. Armed with senior administrators with plenty of AFL experience, the Giants have also successfully made inroads into the dominance of rival codes in the Western Sydney area, although that project is still a long way from completion. As Demetrio said from the outset, the Giants in Sydney are a multi-generational project, but after a little more than a decade the signs are promising. And along the way, they've done it their way, with fresh thoughts, bold strategies, hefty ambitions, plenty of talent, and one big sound.
GWS are through to the 2019 Grand Final.
Thanks for listening to AFL Team Builders, a zerohanger.com production. This episode was the finale of the series. We hope you enjoyed the show. Stay subscribed though for upcoming bonus episodes, and be sure to check out some exclusive written pieces on zerohanger.com.